Something that I want to start talking a lot more about on this channel is the silent genocide going on in the Congo right now. Over on Twitter/X, I made a very, very detailed, super long thread in which I connect to content creators who are talking about this, resources for aid organizations that are currently on the ground, background information from bipartisan news sources talking about the origins of the conflict with the M23, what's happening, as well as just sharing some of the information shared by other activists. The situation is incredibly dire. It's estimated that 6 million people have already died. What is absolutely diabolical about what's happening is that because African countries, like the Congo, are the richest in natural resources in the world, tech companies that exploit local labor, doesn't even begin to, they use slave labor. It's modern slavery. A lot of these people aren't paid. They're working under the threat of duress, violence, SA. Not only are they dying because of the horrific labor conditions, many are also facing persecution from militia groups. I think there's also a lot of confusion about the difference between cobalt and coltan. These are two of the big hot button words when discussing the silent genocide. Coltan, as I noted, is used to produce tantalum, which is essential for making capacitors and electronic devices. And cobalt is crucial for lithium-ion batteries used in electric vehicles and smartphones. These two resources, along with hundreds of others, are uniquely dense in Congo, meaning that the Congolese people live on land that they should be reaping the profits from. As a leftist, I believe in a full profit-sharing model, as has happened so often, not only in the history of the Congo, but in the history of labor exploitation and human rights abuses and slavery throughout our world. Nations, corporations, and militia groups are becoming filthy rich while exploiting child laborers. This isn't a new issue in the Congo or in countries around the world, but the conditions that the Congo has specifically faced in the past 30 to 50 years are becoming on par with the most violent chapters in this country's history, notably from Belgian occupation, colonization, and exploitation. If you're like me, you probably read King Leopold's Ghost in high school and learned about the horrific things that King Leopold and his military did to the Congolese people, which are too graphic and grotesque to say out loud on camera. But as you can see, even in this article here, this is a massive human rights abuse that human rights lawyers, aid organizations, and people on the ground are working tirelessly to solve. Yet they are incredibly under-resourced, and they are up against the billion-dollar corporations. I shouldn't even say billion, because some of these companies are trillion-dollar corporations, and governments and militaries and militias that are prepared to go to any length to continue exploiting, murdering, SAing, colonizing, underpaying, and enslaving local labor. In 2019, Apple and Google were specifically named in a US lawsuit over cobalt mining. And while Apple has made a sort of half-hearted promise to have sustainable supply chains by 2025, obviously this isn't going nearly far enough. And what of the thousands of people who are dying a week in the interim? I mean, it's diabolical. A book to understand this issue perhaps more deeply is Cobalt Red by Siddharth Kara, which goes into the history of cobalt mining and the ways in which global reliance, and I shouldn't even say reliance because that makes it sound like it's a friendly exchange. I should say global violence and extraction and murder of Congolese people and stealing their resources, because these resources should belong to Congolese people, not to the rest of the world. But because they power our smartphones, our smart cars, all of our electronic devices, these people are worked to the bone. We are unknowingly buying the products with blood money. I, as you can see, lost my composure multiple times while I was tweeting about this because it's just absolutely sickening. And in the book that I'm currently reading that I just referenced, I learned that during the COVID pandemic, while many that were privileged enough to work from home or to rely on electronic devices to continue work, to continue school, this led to an unprecedented demand for electronic devices. And as such, during one of the most dangerous times in modern history for communicable diseases, for infectious diseases, for respiratory illness, Congolese miners were forced to work without masks in close proximity together, many of whom caught COVID-19 and died from it. Because these groups are governed by militias, And because they are a part of a supply chain that enriches US and international corporate interests, stories about their deaths, their exploitation, are often suppressed. And even when human rights lawyers are brave enough, organized enough, and resourced, well equipped enough to advocate on behalf of groups of Congolese families affected, the family members on the ground face reprisals, murders, killings, retributions, and these lawyers are then up against some of the richest and most powerful machines in the world. I want you to know about this issue because it is unconscionable to live in a world where such rampant injustice takes place and we don't even know about it. As Amos Oz says in his short story titled The King of Norway, published many moons ago in The New Yorker, closing your eyes to the cruelty of life is, in my opinion, both sinful and stupid. There's very little we can do, so we must at least acknowledge it. I believe that it is our responsibility as free people to never give in to hopelessness, especially when our discomfort just from knowing the information is so much drastically less than the actual experience of being on the receiving end of this violence. And it is our job as free people of the world to organize, uplift, and amplify voices who are fighting back against this oppression. An organization that I think is doing a really good job is called the International Rescue Committee. From my understanding, whenever there are international audits of organizations on the ground and their ethics, International Rescue Committee always has a very high score, meaning that your money is actually going to effective change. These are the 6 key principles that they've outlined are their target goals with donation funds. And in the thread, I also list other organizations, other content creators, other places and action items that you can do to help right away, apart from just amplifying this knowledge. Something I do want to point out that if you want to have an impact as an activist, if you want to amplify causes and direct your followers to mobilize, to put pressure on Congress for ceasefires, for example, or to direct your followers to donations for a specific cause, pay attention to the most actively used social media sites. Obviously, TikTok is an incredible resource, but after you make your TikTok video, download it and post it on your pages on all of these other platforms with the appropriate hashtags so that you can have the maximum reach, because there's different demographics on each platform. And if you are just talking to TikTok, you're likely just talking to a specific demographic of a specific generation. And if you want to have the maximum impact possible, you got to post everywhere. Lastly, if you follow me on Twitter/X, you will know that I'm very passionate about the Free Palestine movement. I am very passionate about Palestinian liberation, and I am just for the liberation of any oppressed or marginalized group wherever in the world they might be. I think that as free people, it is our duty to stand on behalf of those whose voices are marginalized and silenced. And so I also have action lists of things that you can do right away, ways that you can very quickly, write to your Congress people, sign petitions, find protests to attend, and different activists, especially Jewish activists like Joshua P. Hill, that you can read about and learn more about how to advocate thoughtfully for Palestinian people. I also am making sure to amplify and center the voices of Palestinians on the ground in this especially difficult and very tragic and overwhelming time where the electricity has been cut out in Gaza. It's going to be more difficult to do that because we don't have videos coming out of Gaza at the moment, but I'm going to continue to do my best to amplify authors, poets, activists, news reporters, and any media coverage on the ground in Gaza that I can. And lastly, to close this video, I just want to say that while things may seem hopeless, your voice matters, and you, by sharing, by amplifying activists on the ground, are changing hearts and minds, and you're mobilizing a generation of people to take their activism both online and in the real world incredibly seriously. And you're centering using our platforms for something other than the glorification of ourselves, and instead using them in service of uplifting marginalized voices, those who are persecuted against. And I promise, if you are consistent with your activism and you refuse to give up, the moral arc of history always bends towards justice. This will take years and years of consistent, concentrated work, but we can do this. We've got this. Do not give up. Keep learning, keep growing, keep sharing. I'm with you. I love you. I support you, and we can do this together.